إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعين به ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله تعالى من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا إنه من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه من خلقه وحبيبه بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح بالأمة فكشف الغمة اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك وأنعم على حبيبنا ورسولنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهديه وصار على نهجه إلى يوم القيامة اللهم اجعلنا منهم ومن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين يا رب العالمين. My dear respected brothers and sisters, we start by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We praise and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for who He is. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide our families and our children. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us the best we could be. Until we meet Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can enter Jannah all together. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. When we look at the history of Islam, there's a lot of profound lessons and incidents that took place. One of them is during a very famous battle called the Ma'rakatul Qadisiyah. This was a battle between Muslims and the Persians. Before the battle took place, the leader of the army, who was Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu, who was a great companion of the Prophet ﷺ, he was by the gates of Persia. And a lot of times before battles take place, some negotiations will happen. And sometimes out of these negotiations, no fighting happens. So the king of Persia, who was by the name of Rustum at that time, he asked that someone from the Muslim army to come and speak to him, to find out what are these people all about. Part of it also was to avoid facing the believers. Why is that? Because back then, Islam was extremely powerful. Our Muslim empire was very powerful. The news left Arabia and reached Rome and Persia and East and the West for everybody to watch out for this new empire. So nobody was just going to go into war with the Muslims without having some conversations. So Rustum, who was the king of Persia at the time, wanted to have some sort of a discussion before he decides to go into this war, knowing that most likely he would lose. So Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas sends him a companion by the name of Rub'i ibn Amir. And the reason I'm mentioning the names is it's important for us to understand and remember them as much as we can. Sometimes we forget all the names, but that's okay. It's not a big deal, but it's important for us to mention them. So his name is Rub'i ibn Amir. Now Rub'i was just a simple companion. He wasn't like someone who was like a big leader. I mean, he was a relative leader in his tribe, but he wasn't someone big. And we actually don't even know much about him other than this one incident. So when he approached the door to enter upon the king of Persia, the guards saw him, and he was wearing very simple clothing. He was wearing just normal clothing. He was like, "Are you gonna go meet the king of Persia like this? Like, we have to give you something to dress properly. You can't just go stand in front of the king the way you're dressed." He says, "I'm gonna enter like this, or you guys have to fight us." And they were like, "Okay, fine, you can come in." So they let him in. So he entered, and then the guards that were inside, obviously the king of Persia at the time, Rustum, he's sitting on a chair that is gold, and he's all, his highness, whatever, because that's how they used to treat their kings back then. So Rub'i ibn Amr radiallahu anhu enters, and they put some sort of something on the floor for him to stand on, and he says, "I'm not going to stand on this. I'm just going to you don't have to do anything extra. Let me just talk to him." So Rustum asks Rib'i, he says, "Who are you guys? What are you doing here? Why are you here? What are you trying to do? Who's this messenger that you have? Tell me about yourself. And this is what I want everybody to focus on, inshallah ta'ala. Rib'i said, إن الله بعثنا لنخرج العباد من عبادة العباد إلى عبادة رب العباد ومن ظلم الأديان إلى عدل الإسلام ومن ضيق الدنيا إلى سعة الدنيا والآخرة. What does this mean? He says, you as us, why are we here? We are people that Allah sent us. God sent us to take people from the worship and the veneration of humans to the worship and the veneration of the creator of all these humans, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we are people that were sent by Allah to let people out of the injustices of leaders and the injustices of humans to the justice of our religion. And we are people to take people out of the tightness of this world to the vastness of this world and the hereafter. Rustum heard this, and obviously to him it's very foreign speech. Like nobody speaks like that. And you're speaking to a king of one of the biggest empires at that time. So he said, what are you guys, like, why? Like, why are you doing all of this? And what happens if we go to war with you? He said, we're promised two things. If we die, we have Jannah waiting for us. And if we beat you guys, we have dignity waiting for us in this world. We have honor waiting for us in this world. Why am I mentioning this? And why do I start about Khutbah? Brothers and sisters, if you look at our ummah today, we're hurting. Our ummah, from Kashmir to Palestine, from Syria to China, from Burma to Yemen, and the list goes on and on and on. We're hurting. Our ummah is not at its best. And sometimes, because we live in the West, we live in America, alhamdulillah, we have our homes, we have our jobs, we have our families, we forget that we have a role to play. Yes, maybe some of us want to help. Maybe some of us wants to do something. But what is the core of the solution? Yes, maybe we're going to do campaigns and raise funds. Maybe we're going to go protest against someone like Moody. Maybe we're going to go do a lot of different things to try to push off injustices, to try to push off dhulm that happens to our Muslim brothers and sisters and dhulm that happens to the entire world. And we should do that. But I want us to look at what Rib'i ibn Amr radiallahu anhu said. He said something so profound. What he said could be categorized as the mission statement of believers. Sometimes we have to reestablish our purpose in this world. And this is the topic of today, actually. Reestablishing our purpose in this life. Because once we do that, the state of the ummah will change. At the time of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, who was known to be one of the great leaders of our ummah, who was also known to be a very devout worshipper. Before the Battle of Hattin, which is the battle that the Muslims took back Jerusalem from the Crusades, a lot of you probably know the history behind it, but essentially we were about to go into a really big battle with the Crusaders, who've been in Jerusalem at that time for a very long time. And Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi puts one of the largest armies that Islam has ever seen. And usually before war, they would camp right outside the city to rest. And then after a day or so, then they will go on with their battle. So when they camped right outside Jerusalem, Al-Quds, the next morning the soldiers came to Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi radiallahu anhu wa rahimah, and they asked, are we ready yet? He says, no, we're not going to go in yet. So they said, why not? He said, I'll tell you when we're ready. And every night, one of his things that he would do, he would walk around the camps and the tents and check on everybody. And obviously everybody's sleeping to rest. So the next day came, and he was asked, are we ready yet? He says, no, we're not ready yet. And then at night time, he will go around different tents, check everybody else, and see what's going on. And then a day passed by. One night, as he was going around, he heard all the soldiers reading Quran, making dua, praying Qiyamul Layl. And they were all up, even though they had a battle the next morning. They were supposed to rest, but they were up and running in the middle of the night, making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, crying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, praying Qiyamul Layl. And then the next morning he was asked, are we ready? He said, now you're ready. And then he went and he conquered Jerusalem. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our brothers and sisters and bring it back to the lands of the Muslims. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. What's happening here? Dear brothers and sisters, our purpose, the core of who we are as believers is the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the most mentioned two verses in the entire Quran. Number one is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Remind, as reminder, benefit the believers. How many of us heard that verse before? A lot of us. A lot of us heard that verse before. Now there's another verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions. Miraculously, it comes right after this verse of reminder. The next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ مَا أُرِيدُ مِنْهُمْ مِنْ رِزْقٍ وَلَا أُرِيدُ أَن يُطْعِمُونَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الرَّزَّاقُ ذُو الْقُوَّةِ الْمَتِينُ. You know, it's profound. It's incredible how these two verses come right after each other. Because as believers, you know, it's obvious, like, I know why I'm here. I'm worshiping Allah. Yes, I get that. But right before that verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us to remind each other of that purpose. To remind each other why we are here. To remind each other that there's a purpose that we have to fulfill in this world. And that is the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now that worship cannot, and you might think, why is he talking about worship and then talking about the problems with the ummah? Because we've closed the meaning of worship to mean rituals, to mean praying 5 times a day, fasting in Ramadan. And outside of that, there's nothing going on. How do you expect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the purpose of our life something that will take 1 hour in your day? How long does salah take us on a regular basis? If we count wudu, our adhkar before and after, our sunan, it will take you about an hour and a half. Now what happens to the other 22 hours that you have in your day? Are we not supposed to be worshipers? No, we're supposed to be when we understand the true meaning of worship. When we understand the true meaning of ubudiyyah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ubudiyyah as an Arabic terminology comes from the same root word as abd, slave. And you know, a lot of us worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But to be frank, a lot of us are not slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now how do I test that? What is the difference between being a slave and being a worshiper? It's simple. What happens to you the rest of your day? You know, the other day, wallah, somebody asked me this question. True story. He says, are we supposed to be like good all the time? Or does Islam allow you to lie while you're at work? Or like maybe cheat a little bit, maybe scam the system a little bit. Is that okay? Does Islam allow for it? And I'm like, where's this question coming from? What makes us think that we can just worship Allah in certain places and not other places? Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he was testifying to the purpose of his existence, of his life, alayhi salam, what did he say? قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ وَبِذَلِكَ أُمِرْتُ وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. He said, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he said, Allah told him, say, Inna salati, my prayers, my rituals. Prayers is important. But even in prayers, are we really praying for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not? How does your prayer look like when you're alone versus when someone is around? How does our prayers look like when I am praying in the line and maybe there's someone that's specific standing next to me? Like maybe the Imam of the Masjid. You know, that sujood is going to be a little bit more perfect than when I'm praying alone. Because sometimes we forget that I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't care what's going on around me. I don't care who's around me. He says, Inna salati, my prayers, my rituals. Wa nusuki. And nusuki here could be translated as the sacrifices that you do for Allah, or it could actually mean Allah, all the other acts of rituals could be included under nusuki. It says all of this. وَمَحْيَايَ, and everything in my life is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, we're willing, a lot of us are willing to stand in a protest with our African American community and willing to stand for them. Because there is a systematic racism in the country that we live in. It's a topic for a different day, but it exists. And if we deny it, we're going to have a private conversation afterward. But it's there. And we're willing to sit there and chant and protest and take days off and donate money and do whatever it takes. But the moment an African American brother comes to propose to my daughter, we're going to have a different discussion. We're going to treat them differently. Just because of where they come from. This happens, brothers and sisters. This happens. And, you know, there's a lot of examples, and the question now is, am I really true slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الرِّفْقَ فِي الْأُمُورِ كُلِّهَا. Allah, now, again, the question is, I want everybody to ask, am I a true slave of Allah? Because I know my purpose is worship, but worship is part of the enslavement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I am a slave. I have to do whatever Allah wants me to do. Whether it fits with my mind or not, I have to do it. Whether it feels good or not, I have to do it. Whether it's my culture or not, I have to do it. Whether my parents like it or not, I have to do it. Whether it brings me money or not, I have to do it. Because I'm a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't get to pick and choose. One of the biggest problems of Bani Israel was that they believed in some and they disbelieved in the other. Because it just wasn't working for their whatever they wanted in life. But we cannot do this. If we want izzah back into our ummah, if we want the state of the ummah to change, we have to be true slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught the companions. And that's why when Ibrahim ibn Amr radiallahu anh stood in front of Rustum, I mentioned earlier, what did he talk about? He talked about that enslavement to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why we're here, to be a slave. And Ibrahim alayhi salam said this in the verse that I just mentioned. Inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati. Everything in my life is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa bidhalika umirt. And that's what I was commanded. I was commanded to live for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is going to mean different things to different people. But what we're trying to achieve out of the khutbah today is ask ourselves, am I true slave of Allah? Because my state of spirituality is going to affect the rest of the ummah. It's going to affect the rest of the ummah. Think about this. When the Prophet said that Allah loves gentleness in all of the different matters. Okay? Now that means when I'm gentle, I'm worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, true or not? Because worship is anything that Allah loves. Anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked me to worship Him through it. That's pretty much the definition of worship. Now, a lot of us like to be kind. But I want you to think about a politician who walks into these doors. Man, we act different. And wallahi, I'm saying this to myself before anyone here. We act different. The way we show them gentleness and kindness, the way we treat them, is just out of this world. Which is fine. Nobody is asking you to treat them mean or be rude. But do we give the same respect to our imams and our teachers, our scholars? Do we give the same respect to our wives? Do we deal with our wives the same way we deal outside of the house? Our Messenger ﷺ, when he was asked, he said, I am the best to my family. The absolute best. You know, subhanAllah, until today, and again, I want everybody just to think with me. Let's reflect together. Because we have to fix this heart. This heart that houses the purpose of life, our existence of this world, it's housed in this heart. We have to fix whatever problems that we have. Some of us are still struggling in dealing with our boys and girls equally. You know, seriously. I know our sisters cannot see me, but a lot of sisters would actually agree with me on this. The way we treat our sons is different from the way we treat our daughters. Some of us at least. Think about it. Brothers and sisters, when we go back to what I started with, our purpose in this world is to be slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That enslavement means I do whatever Allah loves for me to do, regardless of anything else. If Allah wants me to be fair, I am fair with everybody. I don't pick and choose. Otherwise, I am doing it for some other reasons. Because Allah is watching me when I'm dealing with people in the masjid, when I'm dealing with people at work, when I'm dealing with people at home, when I'm dealing with people in the street. Allah is watching me in all of these different things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't not watch us. He's always there subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَا تَأْخُذُهُ سِنَةٌ وَلَا نَوْمٌ. He never disappears from our sight. Now, are we true slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's a good question to ask. Because maybe some of us will say, you know what? I'm actually not. I'm fake. I've been acting all along. Yes, I pray 5 times a day. Yes, I have some really nice looking beard. Yes, I dress properly. Yes, I have everything that makes me look Muslim from the outside, but the inside is something else. Are we true slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because if we're not able to answer this question, the state of the ummah will not change. I promise you that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, a verse that we all heard. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah will not change the state of an entire nation, of an entire group, of an entire ummah, until they change what's in their heart. And it starts with the enslavement to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I am a slave of Allah. And whatever Allah wants me to do, I'm going to do. Just give another example. Something again, there's so many examples to mention. So many examples. And we'll probably spend an hour talking about it. But really the purpose of today's khutbah is simple. It's for everybody to walk out of these doors thinking, am I a true slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Am I fulfilling my purpose in this world? To be a slave of Allah, or do I pick and choose? Do I treat people based on how they look like? You know, in Ramadan, we all love to come to Taraweeh. True or not? We all love to come to Taraweeh. It's great. There's some awesome qaris, and I'm crying, and it's awesome. But you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves Salatul Dhuhr more than He loves Salat Taraweeh. Now, where do I get that from? There's a hadith Qudsi where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the Messenger told us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that there is nothing more beloved to Allah for the servant, for the slave to do other than whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it an obligation. So in salah, there is nothing better for us to do for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better than our 5 daily prayers. But Salatul Dhuhr, maybe it will be one line, maybe 2 lines. But Salatul Taraweeh, mashallah, the whole masjid is packed. What happens? Yes, we're at work. Okay, what happened on the weekend? It's the same thing. You would see that there are more people in Salatul Taraweeh than you will see in Dhuhr and Asr. Are we true slaves of Allah? Are we true worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because Allah wants you to come. Shaykh al-Shanqiti, rahmahullah, who's a great scholar in Mauritania, in North Africa. He says, based on this hadith, he says that the sweat of the believer walking to the masjid in the heat to pray dhuhr is more beloved to Allah than the pain in their leg praying an hour of Qiyamul Layl. Because we are slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah loves it more than Allah loves Salatul Dhuhr more than Salatul Taraweeh. There's one more example inshallah I'll mention in the second part of the khutbah. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. One last example, inshallah, then we'll close up the khutbah. And this is an example that one of my teachers always uses. And again, this is just for us to continue reflecting and continue asking ourselves, are we true slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because what's going to change the state of the ummah is for us to re-establish our purpose. Where Allah says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I did not create the jinn or the humans except to worship me. And we talked how worship is simply doing everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. Any act that Allah loves, I have to do. Because I'm a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I have to do it all the time. I don't get to pick and choose. The example I want everybody to leave with, inshallah, is I want you to think about you sitting in your house, in your room, in the corner of your house, okay, and you're saying some dhikr. You're saying astaghfirullah, subhanallah, whatever. You're just saying some sort of adhkar, or you're reading some Quran. And you're really into it, and you started to cry. You know, sometimes we have these moments where we feel this closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we start to cry. And you really are into it. And then your parents come, or your dad comes, or your mom comes and says, hey Ahmed, go buy me some tomatoes from ShopRite. You know, a lot of us would immediately snap at our parents. We would literally snap at our parents. Even though you were doing something amazing. You were worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we have to understand that me getting up and fulfilling whatever it is that my parents want is more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than whatever I'm doing in there. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talked about the status of the parents, it's something else. He mentions it right after His worship subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we all know the status of our parents. You know, subhanallah, I see this irony in some of our young folks. MashaAllah, there's a lot of young people here. When we are ready to help the masjid do events and you know, help in our schools and our universities and doing some da'wah efforts and all this stuff. And when you look at your treatment to your parents, it's outside the window. What happens? Are we true slaves? Are we true slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because Allah wants you to be the best to your parents. And I cannot claim that I'm the best to my parents. But we have to talk about it. To re-establish